Good evening. We're going to call this meeting to order. Superintendent Riley, I believe, just sent an email, so you probably haven't gotten it. He's apologizing for the fact that he had a family issue come up very last minute, so he's not going to be in tonight for the meeting, so I'll be chairing in his stead tonight. So if we could stand for a moment of silence and a salute to the flag. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So tonight we have a mostly informational meeting. So we are going to start with a series of some information videos that we've been talking about, and one is on the mentoring program at Lawrence High School. So the high school has been doing an LHS peer mentoring program. It's a semester-long peer facilitated program that helps orient and connect freshmen to high school while promoting positive change in school culture. The program aims to ease that transition period for the freshmen, provide them with positive peer models and role models, expand their leadership opportunities for our older students in the upper academy, and build a safe and caring school community while increasing tolerance and acceptance of diversity. So we wanted you to see a little of this program in action.
The fact that Ninth Grade Academy was created and knowing that our freshmen weren't going to have access to or exposure to upperclassmen, and how can we develop something, we decided on a group mentoring process where our mentors would be in a classroom.
I'm a senior from MST. I'm part of the mentoring program in Algebra 1.
I am a senior from PFA, and I am peer mentoring Mr. Hicks' AP Human Geography class.
Teacher buy-in is very important, and they all have appreciated the program. When we first started, we had 2 teachers volunteer to be part of the pilot.
During my first period, I have 2 peer mentors one day and 3 peer mentors the other.
I have either 2 or 3 mentors.
My guidance counselor actually asked me if I wanted to become a mentor. I accepted the offer, and I've been here ever since. I think that when you become a mentor, your mindset changes. I think before I do something.
So when we first started the program, we had 10 mentors. As of right now, I have 49 upper school mentors, 12 teachers that have mentors in their classrooms. So yeah, well over 100 students are benefiting from the program.
I teach another of the same class later in the day where I don't have a peer mentor. There is a huge difference. Having the older students in the class really brings out the maturity in my students. They would much rather be helped by the mentors than by me, and just having those extra people to go help makes a big difference because people aren't sitting confused, and so they can get to more difficult material more quickly.
I had to refresh my memory about algebra and certain things. So that was the challenge. It's great to have someone to look up to as a freshman.
So I have in the morning with my AP Human Geography class. It's the first year we're doing this course. It's the first time I've taught it. The mentors I have never seen this content either, but what's really nice as experienced upperclassmen, many of whom have AP classes themselves, and just knowing how to be successful and approaching new material and working hard, help them figure out how is the best way for me to start studying, or how do I review, or how do I ask this question.
I'm actually one of the first group of peer mentors. They're very, very comfortable with me. I would observe the students first, figure out what exactly they're focusing on for the day. And then if any students have any questions or concerns, they would ask me for help, and I'll be more than willing to help them.
It's just been so awesome to have another voice in the classroom saying, here's why you need to try hard, here's why you need to get to school on time.
It's not just that teacher in the front saying that thing, it's coming from a peer that they respect and see as being important in their lives.
Don't be shy to ask for help. Keep up grades and everything, and be a role model. Have everyone know you, and for a good reason, not for anything bad.
Next year, if we could have at least 1 or 2 mentors in every single class, that would be the goal.
You learn a lot about yourself with this program. I used to think my patience was not very good, and I've learned that it really is. I'm considering working with kids in the future, just because I can see myself doing that. Definitely worth it.
So it's interesting, that was one of the things that the focus groups of students on the high school campus had mentioned over the past couple of years, that it would be good for the ninth graders to have older students kind of guiding them along. So it's nice to see it come to fruition. Our second video tonight is from the Arlington Middle School's Green Team Recycling Field Trip. We've had several middle schools who have adopted a Green Team challenge and helping to students to understand the power of recycling and sustainability practices. So for the last 2 years, the teachers at the Arlington Middle, the Patham Middle, and the Weatherby have led teams of students who have developed creative ways to get that message across to other students. So this is their video.
On June 1st, the Arlington Green Team went on a field trip to E.L. Harvey, where all of your recyclables go. As you can see, there are tons of recyclables that need to be sorted out. $20 million worth of machines and multiple workers help make it happen. As you can see in this mountain of recyclables, there are many plastic bags. Believe it or not, even though these bags are plastic, they cannot be recycled because they get tangled in the machinery. This causes the workers to have to cut out the plastic bags twice a day in order to get the machines up and running. The machines then separate glass, paper, plastic, aluminum, and cardboard. After they are all separated, each pile of either glass, paper, plastic, aluminum, and cardboard gets sent into a baler where they get squished into bales. As you can see in this photo, soda cans are tightly packed into these bales. Each bale weighs 2,500 pounds. After the whole process of separating and baling the recyclables, they load the balls into shipping containers, which are then loaded onto cargo ships, and are then sent to many different places all over the world who do not have access to all of these resources. The main consumer that buys the products is China.
And the other schools are doing something very comparable with their green teams, making sure everybody's, you see recycle posters in almost all of the schools at this point, making sure we're being good stewards of our environment. So. And the last video we have tonight is the Breen Greenhouse Ceremony. Last year, the Breen School implemented a science lab at this school for pre-K to K, early introduction to science and practice with hands-on types of projects. This year, with the help of community partners and PTO fundraising, they have actually built a greenhouse in the schoolyard to help the students connect to the growing cycle. So they'll be working part-time in the greenhouse, part-time in the classroom. So during the winter, they'll be classroom bound, but the rest of the year, they'll take their classes outside in the greenhouse. So we want you to see the ceremony where they just dedicated the greenhouse.
The John Breen School community is very proud and excited to embrace the vision of building a developmentally appropriate outdoor classroom in the form of a greenhouse. This greenhouse will enable our young learners to have enriched hands-on experiences as they develop an awareness and deeper understanding of living things in our environment. We are so proud of how the community has come together to foster science learning. We have many people to thank who have contributed to this grand opening. Our PTO early on have been fundraising for this project. Mr. Riley and Mr. Merlino for always supporting the Breen Going Green. Lastly, the Breen staff for their ongoing commitment to the John Breen School.
So we hope to see that up and operational come the fall, so that students will be able to actually be out doing their classes in the greenhouse and doing some growing as part of their learning for pre-K and K. So those were the updates from the superintendent. And then next on our agenda was you had asked for an update on where we were with our strategic plan in special education. So I'm going to give you an update at the end of year one where we are on the benchmarks that we had put in place to be able to achieve this year. And Joan's going to give you out a copy of the presentation so you can follow along. So as you know, we set some ambitious benchmarks in the SPED task force at the end of last year. So I wanted to be able to share with you what activities we've taken, where we have met the mark, where we might have some work still to go, and where we think we're going in our next year to be able to continue to meet the goal that we have set in 5 years. So our first priority area was in the inclusion for all. with the goal that at the end of the 5 years, Lawrence Public Schools is going to ensure that all students, regardless of disability type or whether or not they're performing at grade level, have high quality, inclusive opportunities across the board. So the annual benchmarks we wanted to have was to have an implementation plan and template and measures for assessing the quality of the services, to have the early elementary pre-K to 2 classrooms working towards developing their action plans or implementation plans for implementing services this coming year, to have increased differentiation happening in the pre-K to 2 level, and to show trends in those grade levels towards more inclusive opportunities. So this year we have made a slight change in working with the consultants who have been working with our schools. Instead of calling it an implementation plan, they've named it an action plan because it follows along with their school review work they've been doing and fits in with their planning as part of their school plans development for each school year. So at this point, the group in the pre-K to 2, as well as all the elementaries and 3 of our middle schools and the full Weatherby School, have created their initial action plan. So we went above and beyond the pre-K to 2 range because we had schools that were already starting some work and wanted to get on board early to start developing their plans of action for the upcoming school year. So we now have roughly 10 schools who are actually in the process of having their action plans finalized to implement this coming school year. So they have done work around assessing and doing a review of their schools, working with one of the consultants, whether it was Dr. McDade, who is an inclusion specialist, Dr. Petner, who ran a full inclusion school and is now consulting around full inclusion, Nabia Migueli, who is an inclusion specialist out of the Boston area, who's worked with a couple of our schools, or have been worked with the Ely Center, who does a lot around ancillary service personnel and how do you do inclusion for those personnel in the classroom. So they've set their action plans, and they're each unique to their individual school because we are very clear that there is no one way to do inclusion. Inclusion has to be individualized to your school's population, and your school's needs. So it's not one size fits all, but it's unique to your particular school, how you will roll it out, and what type of model you will implement. So those schools have moved forward and are providing some professional development have already started this year to set the stage to make sure their staffs are ready. And at the pre-K to 2 level, based on early learning walk data, because we by the time they were ready to start implementing some of their activities, it was probably mid-year. But based on their early learning walk data, they are seeing much more differentiation happening across the classrooms, both the special ed classrooms and the general ed classrooms, as they share practices around how to assist students with disabilities in being in their general education classroom. Our initial data, we have to measure from end of June of last year to just the March 1 data because we haven't collected our June end of year data. We are seeing a decrease in pre-K to 2 in terms of placements of students into substantially separate programs. We are seeing more partial placements, so we're moving away from sub-separate to more partial inclusion. And our overall full inclusion rate right now is about 57.5%, which is comparable to where it was at the end of last year, but we know we have about 3 months of IEPs that we don't have that data yet uploaded to the state to get the rest of the calculation for the end of this school year. So we seem to be pretty much on track with what we wanted to see starting in the trend in the pre-K to 2 area, and we're a little ahead in getting the 3rd, 4th, and a couple of the whole schools and early middle schools on board with starting the work. I've been very pleasantly surprised that I've seen an embracing of the concept of moving toward inclusion across the district. So the high school, even though they're the last group that we're looking to get that work going with, I've seen some early starts with some inclusive practices and some team teaching already taking shape up there. So they are already starting to set the stage for the work they have to do in the next couple of years. So in inclusion, there's more work to do, and there always will be, but I think we're pretty close to where we wanted to be at this time. And we're finalizing the quality assurance measures over the summer, so we have them in place for the start of the school year to make sure we're measuring and making sure everybody's on the same page about what does inclusion best practice look like and what should you be seeing as an administrator in your classrooms. Our second goal was around communication with families, and that was to look at a survey for parents in terms of their experience in working with the district. In working with our newly elected executive board for CPAC, they asked that we hold the survey off until the fall. So we did not do it this spring because there was a new election just held in May, and the new board said they would like to have a little more input into what that survey looks like. And since it's really the first year we've had a full election in CPAC, I want to honor their voice in what they think needs to happen with parents. So we were able to look at our CPAC this past year. It was small to start with. We had about 3 or 4 steady members last year. They did form into an executive board and started to create an agenda and meetings and disseminating information out to the families. And over the course of this year, we've grown to a steady 25 or 30 people coming to most of our monthly meetings, which doesn't sound like a lot, but having worked in SPED for many, many years, that's one of the largest regular CPAC meetings we've seen probably in the last decade. So it's small growth, but it's a good start to get going with. And we were able to actually have nominations and hold an election, and we had 7 people who actually were nominated to take on the executive team roles, and that's president, vice president, and secretary, because they're not yet ready to start fundraising to have a treasurer yet, so they wanted to get those in place. And we have a new board that just took on their roles at the June 7th meeting last week. So they are now coming up with new ideas, and that's why they've asked to have the survey not go out in June, but to send it out probably in early September, because they wanted to take a closer look at that. In terms of our infrastructure in being able to provide ongoing written and oral communication, we are using the home language survey to look at all of our students in terms of what language they need communication in the home. We are able to take care of 100% of our Spanish speaker language. That's not our big concern. And probably about 85 to 90% of all other languages that we're able to get interpreters for or get things translated into. But we've had some new recent languages come to us that we don't currently have any of our providers that are able to do some of those. And some of them are like people coming from the Congo or people who are doing blended languages. We have a group that are coming from right on the border of Dominican and Haiti, and they have kind of a blend of Haitian Creole Spanish. So we're kind of working with them to see which language is the better one for them to be communicated in, because it's not one or the other at this time. So we do have a little way to go in those singleton or smaller pockets of languages that we don't currently have providers for, or there aren't people out there in the community that we can rally to come in and help support that. We do have 18 interpreters who went through the district training last year. This year we brought on a language consultant to have them come in and assess their language skills in terms of interpreting and give them pointers on how they continue to improve that skill, because it is not an easy task to be listening to me talking and also saying what I'm saying to somebody else at the same time in real time. So we found that for some of them, they know most of the language, so part of the thing was to build a stronger vocabulary in both English and Spanish around some of the terms that our professionals use. So we're working with Dr. O'Loughlin, who runs the BU certification program for interpreters, and he's helping us to develop a plain language glossary. So we're taking all of our terms from all of our professional fields and turning them into a plain language for easy access for families. So we're so used to throwing out either initials or terms that a therapist uses every day, but they're not easy to translate. So we found one of the terms when we were doing our practice assessments was a speech therapist will often say, mean utterance length, okay? Which means the length of any words that the kids are gonna string or syllables the students are gonna string together. but nobody could translate that accurately because it's not an easy term. So we're taking all of their terms and we're starting a glossary, and Dr. O'Loughlin will help do the translation to plain language before we translate it into the Spanish language, so professionals, interpreters would have that readily available to them. So we took a step back about training new ones at this point to make sure the ones we have that are solid. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some other strategies we have for getting more interpreters on board, because we have probably 70% of our students who parents are looking for interpreting at team meetings. So this was not enough at this point, and we're still working to get more people credentialed or certified as interpreters. All right. You want me to go through the whole thing and we'll go back to questions? Yep. Okay. Third priority was looking at the high quality continuum of services. So although the push is for special education to move towards inclusion, we also know that you have to have services available for every child, whether they need that substantially separate day school or out of district placement, all the way to the child who can be fully included and just have services within their classroom. So you have to provide the whole spectrum for students. So as we looked at that, we did needs assessments of the schools to see where they were in being able to provide all of that continuum and what they would need to be put in place. So all of that pre-K to 4, the middle schools have worked to do their work. We've done quick assessments with the others, and they will be working this coming year, if they weren't in the first tier, to do the same thing in their schools. They are at the point that they have their action plans ready to go, and they are just finalizing the language, and will be sending them to me before the end of the month so that we have them on file to hold them accountable for the work. But as they did design their goals for this coming school year as part of their budget process and planning, many of them do have inclusion as one of their priority goals for their school for this coming school year. So they are buying into where they need to go for all of our students. And when we talk inclusion, we're not just talking students with disability, we're talking every child should be included at the maximum possible given their needs. So the inclusion practices work group did convene because of the number of staff that we had. We broke them into 3 groups. We had a pre-K to 4 group who worked on looking at strategies and best practices for that developmental group. We had a middle school group who worked on the 5 through 8. And then we had a high school group that looked at high school and what kind of best practices are out there for moving towards inclusion, classroom work, behavior, all of the whole spectrum of things. So they have all, actually, I think the last groups were meeting today to put the final piece of their work together. The pre-K to 4 has already sent me their online documents that they've completed and the binder of what work they've put together. And we're going to take all of those and create a best practices inclusion guide that will go out to staff in the fall. So that's our summer work, to finish that off and put it in place for the fall. And while we're doing that, we're updating our district curriculum accommodation plan, because I believe the inclusion practices lines well to that plan. It should be a component of that so that it's all updated at the same time, so staff have those resources in place. And the tools and practices for monitoring system, we've explored them, we have ideas for them, but we wanted to see what the best practices guide came out to make sure that whatever monitoring system and tools we decide to use aligns to the work that the groups have been doing around the best practices, so that we're assessing the right items as we move forward. The goal is to have all of those things finalized and ready for use at the start of the school year. We had hoped June, but we're about a month or so behind that and making sure all that happens. Our 4th priority was in professional learning. We chose not to use the word development because to me that's like a one-shot training, whereas professional learning to me says it's an ongoing process and you're continuously learning. Yes?
I'm sorry. You said in June, I missed that part. That in June, what will happen?
The rest of the information will be coming in from the work groups.
Okay.
So that we will have them by the end of this month, so that over the summer we can combine them all into the guide. Okay? So we had hoped to have it all done at the end of June, but it's probably going to be the end of July, so that we'll be ready for the opening of school. So our 4th, professional learning. So our goal was to do a baseline of what professional development and learning opportunities have been out there, and to survey instructional staff around their needs. So we do have a baseline data collection that was done of what has been happening and what were the big areas that people were most concerned about as they start looking towards this more inclusive environment for students with disabilities. And the common themes that have been identified across the schools are understanding more about autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, in terms of just what are the variations about what that child can present like, because the saying would be, if you met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child. You can't say that they're all the same because they're very unique depending on where they are on that spectrum. So that was a big one for everybody from paraprofessionals to administrators in terms of what they felt they needed to know more about. Schools are looking for more work on how to better their response to intervention in terms of looking at a lot of the behavioral, the tier 2 and 3 behavioral interventions. They feel like they're pretty solid on the academic interventions, but what do you do with the child who's not buying into the school-wide approach to how we're doing behavior so that they can still succeed and be in the classroom without disrupting and get their needs met? Looking at team teaching and inclusion practices and what are the better practices that they could be utilizing or replicating that would work in their schools. Looking at differentiation of instruction. Seems like we've done a lot of differentiation of instruction, but every time it comes up, there are people that say we really could use more of that. We've learned how to do some, but there are new strategies and techniques we'd like to be learning. So that was one of the other big items that came forward, and across different grade levels, across different contents. And the last one was around social pragmatics. So we did a little bit of work on that, and social pragmatics are really about your communication skills and how you engage with others and how you get your needs and wants known to people. So particularly for students who have disabilities who may be non-communicative or have a really difficult time understanding and expressing what's going on with them. A lot of work around how do you get them to communicate, how do you allow them tools to allow them to communicate with you so they can carry on a social conversation and be able to interact with their peers more effectively. So those were the big topics that came out across the board. So we have provided, several schools have had individual training based on what plans they've been putting in place. And we have just organized a 3-day training that's going to happen August 14th, 15th, and 16th around many of these topics in 2.5 to 3 hour blocks over those 2.5 days. And we sent that out to schools yesterday, and Dr. McDade will be doing those. And I think I already have over 50 teachers who have signed up to come in early on those 3 days to take these types of trainings because they know it's something they need to have in order to be successful as they move forward. So you could tell staff really is eager to get this information to be able to implement what they need to implement. So the survey that we were going to administer was put on hold because the schools felt that by going through the school review process, which includes a focus group with staff around what their needs are and what their professional learning was actually getting the same information rather than having them do yet another survey. So we said that was fine. We were getting the same information without yet another survey that we're asking teachers or staff to do. So we agreed to that, and they have had their input if they've had their school review. And those that are doing school reviews next year will also go through that same process to inform any more that we need to know about professional development that may be different for middle and high school levels. So that's where we stand on our professional learning, and there are a lot of different activities that people have in place that they're doing, and a lot of it they're looking for people who can help support them not only in doing the instructing, but then coming in and doing some coaching and follow up with the leaders and with the staff. So we're engaging people on that now.
Dr. Bergeron, could you pause for now so we could entertain some questions from the committee? Anyone? Mr. Payano.
Yes, well, first, Madam Chair, it makes more sense if, what else is missing for the presentation? It might make more sense for us to go over and ask questions per slides, because I know I have questions all across the board.
Well, why don't we go back to the first slide then and ask you a question?
Okay.
All right. Do you mind mind doing that, Dr.?
Because I have just like 2 more slides, but whatever you want to do.
So my question begin on slide 2. So I will allow others to ask questions about part 1.
You want to go back to slide 1, Dave? Oh, slide, yeah, priority 1, sorry.
Questions of the group? All right, Mr. Payano, you're on.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
priority 2, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Bergeron. First, let me say I think I'm definitely not an expert in this field. I started learning more about and advocating more for our children that have disabilities about 3 years ago, when I got a call from several parents when their children were being moved. I forget from what school, but they were being moved to the Bruce, the lower Bruce.
SES Annex.
And that's when I started to get more involved and more engaged. And I know that we've met several times around the lack of speech therapists that we have. But I'll get to those questions a little bit later on towards the end. In slide 2, when we're talking about communications with families, there was a question about, I'm trying to find out, so the CPAC, I'm trying to, we haven't really communicated much with this body. I think it might be great if, sometime in the fall, the committee was invited to one of their meetings so we can learn more about how they're doing. I had a question, has there been some type of survey being done with them so we can find out more about what their thoughts are as far as what the group is? Because I think sometimes as an organizer, we might think that vocally they might say that things are going great, or that there are no issues, but if we pass out a survey, we might find important information that will strengthen the group.
So last June, we did do a survey out to the parents on topics that they wanted to have information on, or they wanted to have meetings around, and allowed them to have write-ins on anything that we didn't think of as a group in terms of the CPAC that was president's group that was together. We had the largest return. We had over 350 returns, which I know doesn't sound big, but considering we used to get 50 or 60 returns, we had 350 returns on the surveys. We were able to cover all of the topics that people had prioritized as important, because almost every one of them seemed to come out in the important category to a large number of parents. So we did all of those. We were going to do another survey in June, but the new elected CPAC exec board asked to hold, that's what they want to do in the fall. So they want to combine it with asking the parents about how they feel about their work and their interacting with the department, or the staff at the school around addressing the needs of their child, as well as asking them for other types of services or trainings or networking opportunities they would like. But I'll tell you, they would love to be able to sit and chat with you or have you come in and meet with them, because they're looking for ways to better reach out within the community. We've talked about neighborhood associations. The new leaders are talking about going to the churches and having forums that parents can come to. They've talked about going to the Spanish radio and just talking about that they are here and how you can get involved. So they've got some good new ideas about where they want to be going, but I'm sure they would love to chat and have your input.
Yeah, that'd be great. And just as a follow-up, I think members of this committee can definitely help facilitate their advocacy within the community. And I definitely would love to be invited. I'm sure other members would as well. But even if our information, if they feel empowered to communicate with the school committee members, because I think it's important, especially if they're taking a leadership role, for us to listen to their issues and what it is that they care about, because I think that will better sort of inform and our advocacy.
And I think that's a great idea. I go to every meeting, I meet with them on a regular basis, but it's more as in kind of to support what they want to do. I don't weigh in on their choices, so they can feel free to decide what they need. I know one thing that they're really looking for and I'll put it out because you may be able to help them, is to find more resources in the community that will provide activities or after-school programming for students who have more severe disabilities.
Okay.
So it's something I've raised to many of our community agencies, that you have a large population of students that don't have the opportunity to take swimming lessons, that don't have the opportunity to be in a football or basketball or baseball type of activity, or don't have an after-school program because people aren't trained to be able to address their needs. And I try to encourage them. That would be a population they should be looking to serve and get training for people to come in and help them.
So I would say, Dr. Bergeron, that it'd be important for funders from different, like that type of information needs to get out. So I'm part of a foundation that gives money for, it's the summer fund. So we give money for pretty much all the activities going on in Lawrence during the summer. And there was a question because one of the organizations was catering to students with disabilities, but the cost was very high. So there had to be a discussion about why the cost is high and why it's important, how there aren't these type of activities for this population. So I think the more the community and the people that are in the sort of nonprofit and the givings world understand this, the better likely that more activities will open up in the future. So I would love to help them out with that.
And I know that we have parents who are traveling to Danvers and Watertown and places like that for their children to be involved in activities within the community. So it's something they're really looking for.
Thank you.
Any more? Mr. Pavel? Mr. Payano? Any other questions? Dr. Bergeron, have you identified classrooms where inclusion has really taken off at the K-2 level?
We have several classrooms where inclusion is really going very well.
Are there any plans to have peer-to-peer
We've started,
coaching
been sharing, I meet with the early childhood leaders once a month, so we share practices there, and they've actually started having visits going back and forth to come and see what we're doing in this area around inclusion, see what you could use and take with you, or come and look at what we've done here. So they are doing a lot more classroom visits across schools to see practices in action that they can replicate.
Now, as far as the needs that were identified for the staff, the professional learning, has that been budgeted for in the upcoming FY18 budget?
Yes.
I think that's it for me.
Okay.
So I do have
Mr. Payano?
I do have other questions, but I don't want to take up all the time. So
All right.
I want to make sure.
Why don't you continue with the last two slides and then
Anything on high
open it up.
quality while we're going?
On priority 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
High quality services, yes.
So the goal for priority 3 is to have students with disabilities access consistent, high quality programs and receive consistent services year round. So historically, it seems like staff retention has been impacting that goal. What is the attrition rate for staff within the special education department since the start of the receivership?
We're back. It hasn't changed significantly in terms of teachers. So our teacher staff, no more turnover than it had been in the past. So you always have a little mobility, or they may have been in special ed a long time and want to go to general ed, not uncommon. We are seeing a trend in general with our younger staff. They don't stay in one place a long time. So it might be 3 or 4 years and then they change and they move. So that's kind of a newer phenomenon for us, but that's across all domains. In terms of our ancillary providers, we've seen more turnover than we had in a long time, and I think it's the competitive world at this point. So our OTs and our speech people, they're not out there. There aren't a lot of them available. So we have had a couple of retirements each year in those areas. So this year, our PT left mid-year. We couldn't even find a hire from an outside agency because they couldn't find anyone that could fill in. So we've been providing individual compensatory services with outside providers that might have a case that they could take. And we're doing some compensatory over the summer with the PT that is actually retiring at the end of the summer program. So we have 2 PT positions we're looking to fill. Our OTs are intact. and we've only replaced one because we had a retirement mid-year, and we were able to replace
Dr. Bergeron,
that.
can you repeat that? What is it? You said.
Our occupational therapist, OT.
Okay. So I would say, so for some of the abbreviations, I know. But
And I'm so used to saying them, so please stop me. It's just, we're an alphabet soup in special education. So our occupational therapist, we have one retirement coming up in the fall. So that one's posted. We had one who retired in February. We were able to fill her position already. So I think we're going to be whole for occupational therapist as the school year starts. Speech and language pathology has been a struggle. We had one that was empty this year, and we ended up contracting for a person to work, and we added in additional speech language assistants to help with the caseloads. The loads are still high. It's still something we're monitoring because the referral rates for speech evals are through the roof. Almost every 3-year-old coming out of early intervention is looking for a speech eval. So we're working with our community agencies about not every child needs a speech eval. So let's look at ways you can look at their language and see what's appropriate and what's second language versus an actual language deficit. So we have 3 positions. That's an addition of 1 additional speech language pathologist that we're adding to the group next year, and filling all 7 of our SLA positions, because we have 2 that are leaving to go back to school to become SLPs. So they're hoping that they'll finish their coursework and be back to us in a couple of years when they get done. So we're hopeful that that will be the case and they will return.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Payano?
SLA, SOP?
Speech language assistant, speech language pathologist. So one of our staff who was one of our speech assistants 2 years ago just finished his program and immediately called us to see if we had an opening for him to come back. So he is now back on board to start next school year. So that's a positive thing that they want to come back and work in the district after they finish their licensure. So those positions are the ones that we have currently open, and that's going to be on the slide later too. And we had 1 psychologist position, which I think is going to be filled shortly, and we've been interviewing for that.
No, I have more questions.
Dr. Rivera?
Thank you. In regards to the speech language pathologist that you were referring to, how many total do you have in the district, not including CFYs? I'm sorry, clinical fellow.
Yeah. This year we had 1 clinical fellow who just finished off their supervision. Last year we had 1, so they're already credentialed. 7 pathologists,
not including CFYs.
right?
Okay.
Because they're all now licensed at this point.
They're all now licensed. Recently licensed?
1 recently licensed.
1 recently licensed. So they cannot provide supervision for speech assistants, CFYs,
Right.
their first 3 years.
Right.
So how is the supervision looking like for CFYs? Because the caseloads are really high. And for supervisions for speech assistants, they need 10% of their services under direct supervision, and then 10% in addition to that, indirect or direct. So how are they providing that supervision level in addition to treating their students, going to IEP meetings, doing evaluations?
It has been a struggle, and it's something we've been working with on a regular basis this year because of the in and out of staff. We had somebody who came in and then went out on maternity leave and never returned, so we've been juggling. So we have given them all mentor stipends so that they could do some of their supervision and support of the SLAs outside of the regular school day as part of their work. And they are actually, a lot of them have become savvy around while they're writing reports. They actually have their speech assistant doing services within their classroom so that they can be monitoring what's happening and seeing their work while they're observing them, and other times for their direct supervision. So they do have scheduled time every week where they do supervision. Some of them have 2 assistants, or they share two different speech pathologists, so they split the supervision. But it has been a juggle all year long to make sure they were getting what they needed and staying within the parameters of their licenses.
Right. And are you able to provide documentation of that supervision to the committee? The reason why I ask is because there was an assistant who resigned recently because she didn't get the supervision that she needed as an assistant.
Okay.
So I would love to
I
see the
can-
documentation.
I will see if I have that, because I'm meeting with all the speech people to check out in the next 2 days.
Okay. In addition to that, what factors has the task force found that both negatively and positively affects the turnover rate for therapists within the special ed department?
I'd say caseloads are high, and some of it's competitive in terms of salary that they can get in other venues at this point in time because of the lack of therapists across the country. So those seem to be the two things that are.
So I have in my possession a letter of resignation dated February 21st, 2014 from a special education staff citing a hostile work environment. I also have an email from a PT in 2015, February 23rd, to the COO that also cites working in a hostile work environment. That same school year in 2015, a school psychologist resigned to work for another school district in the middle of the year. 2016, there was a speech language pathologist who was bilingual and a great therapist, also resigned to work for another district because of similar issues. Are these issues now being addressed?
I haven't had anyone come forward to me citing a hostile work environment. I don't know the cases you're talking about, but I have not had anyone come to me saying there was a hostile work environment. They've been come and they've explained their concerns. We've talked with the union about those concerns, and we're trying to address them and hire as much as we can. When there is nobody, there's nobody, but we still have to provide as much service. So we've given extra time. We've allowed them to come in and work on vacations to catch up on some of theirs, giving them time to finish their reports and paying them additional time. We're trying to come up with ways to make it work while we're working on trying to slow the evaluations that are coming in and trying to weed out. Because what we found out of all the evaluations, less than 50% actually needed service. So we're spending a lot of time evaluating when the child doesn't really need the services in speech.
Right, and I understand that the department is overwhelmed. We're getting a lot of referrals coming in, and I understand that the caseloads are really high. But I have the documentation to support what I'm saying, and I would be more than happy to share that with you because honestly, as a physical therapist and someone who has worked for the district, it really saddens me that students are missing out on services over unprofessionalism. That's something that can be easily addressed.
And I would like to do that because, like I said, I've talked to pretty much all of the ancillary providers, and I haven't had anyone talk about hostile environment, but you know.
Do you provide exit interviews for all therapists who leave the district?
I don't. HR takes care of exit interviews.
Okay, so
Some are open and will tell me why they're leaving, but others just go through the process and go through HR and don't share necessarily with me the rationale for their leaving.
So does HR. I'm wondering if we can get documentation from HR in terms of the staff turnover and the exit interviews to see if there's something that we can do to mitigate it, because I honestly feel that in other school districts this isn't an issue, and here it is, and I feel like more so during this receivership than before, and I'm truly concerned.
I mean, I know we have numbers around interviews and exits. I don't know, you can't get specifics because we can't share personnel types of information, but I'm sure we can tell you what the rationale or the reason for many of them, if they've shared them. Some people just quietly say, I'm just resigning, I have a better offer somewhere, but they don't share necessarily the reason that prompted them to look for another placement. I know we did have, during receivership, we've had a lot of people who have left because of our extended time, and it didn't fit their needs as a family to be able to work those extended hours. So we did have, in the first couple of years, a lot of people who made that decision that they couldn't do an 8-hour workday here and still be addressing their needs and their family needs. So we did see a glut early on, but I hadn't heard as much about hostile environment.
Thank you.
Mr. Payano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a few questions on this slide. Before I sort of start sort of a similar line of inquiry as far as the speech therapist, I had a question around the needs assessment. It says it was given to at each school. Is that all the schools in LPS or
No.
specific schools?
This first group of schools, so there are about 10 of them that have done the process this year. The next tier, because we were focused heavily on pre-K to 2 this year, but we expanded actually to elementary, and a couple of the upper schools were part of that as they opted in. Next year we'll be going down through the next round of schools that didn't get that done this year.
Okay. Since school is, there's a few days until it's over, at what point will there be a report or an assessment as to how we were sort of meeting the needs from the previous assessment?
Well, this assessment we just finished because that was our goal over the course of this year. So next year we will be offering the opportunities that they've asked for
So the assessment was done throughout the calendar year?
throughout this school year, yes.
Okay. Could we, I'd love to get, maybe it's not the entire report, but at least to see what we feel like, what our strengths and weaknesses are, just to get a better idea of what LPS will be working on for next year.
Okay, every school has their own individual report, so we've pulled from all of the reports. So I can give you a summary of all
Yeah,
the
like a
pieces
one-page
like
executive
that.
summary, that'd be
Okay.
great. And Dr. Bergeron, I know that the issue of speech therapists, I feel like we've been talking about it for like the last 2 years. And when we first began having, at least you and I began having that conversation, there were some ideas on how to create a better pipeline, how to retain our employees for a longer period of time. Like, where are we on that? Like, has there been any progress? And then also, what are our thoughts for next year when it comes to improving that?
We have reached out to all of the area schools who are putting out students in the speech and language field. Not large numbers. Many of them only take a small cohort into their graduate programs. And at this point, we haven't been successful in getting people who want to come up and do any of their practical work in Lawrence, particularly if they're in around the Boston area. Very convenient for them to be going into the hospital setting or a school right there while they're at grad school. We've reached out to anything up in the lower New Hampshire, lower Maine area, and again, it's a supervision issue for the college at this point. They don't want their instructors needing to come to do their supervision this distance away. So we are continuing to reach out, and we've reached out to ASHA to see if they have some recommendations of schools that they know.
I'm sorry, you reached out to who?
The American Speech and Hearing Association. So they are, American Speech and Hearing, ASHA, yes. I'm so used to saying ASHA. We are asking them if they have some ideas about where other resources might lie, because we're competing heavily against the hospitals at this point, who are filling their positions because there is more flexibility in their scheduling for a lot of the therapists, and the pay is better. It is.
Dr. Bergeron, does UMass Lowell have a program?
No.
No? Okay. So it looks like this is sort of like a systematic problem that we have.
It's a national problem, actually.
Okay. So perhaps it's not something that we alone can try to overcome. So it sounds like we might need to get together with a couple of other public schools folks and just have some type of meeting, invite some.
We are part of actually the collaborative, so we meet with them, and they have 15 of the local districts that are members. So we meet with them and their special education directors to talk about what are the resources they're doing. We're also trying to encourage some of our current students to look at speech,
right? But
speech therapy as their college pathway.
But it sounds like we need to have like a conversation with our higher educate, Marty Meehan or the chancellor of UMass Lowell, and those folks to see to show that there's interest and there's a need for these positions. And as you're saying, it sounds like they're paid pretty well. It doesn't sound like, I know we've been having this discussion for like 2-3 years, and it doesn't seem like we've been moving the needle. I'm sure it's not because necessarily LPS is not trying, but it sounds like you need more support. Is this group that you're speaking about, are they currently doing this type of advocacy work?
Different communities are doing different levels of advocacy. So the urban superintendents have been advocating around the needs for many of the therapy positions, the speech and language therapy, the occupational therapy, the physical therapy, that there aren't enough that are doing school-based work. They're doing more hospital, clinic, private work at this point. and the fact that there aren't enough programs, and the programs that exist take very small classes in every year, so that you're not putting out enough students to fill the national need. So right now, nationally, there's a 25,000 person deficit in the need for speech and language pathologists.
That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bergeron, I would love to, if there's interest within LPS, to have some type of convening with, like us sort of leading and us inviting some more urban districts in the area to talk with some higher education folks. We can invite the Commission of Higher Education and just start it off with a conversation. Who knows what, where it can go from there. Because I think, I remember, we met, I think it was the Leahy School, and I remember being somewhat upset when you told me the lack of therapists that we had and the huge waiting list. And I was relieved when I heard that we were working on substantive ideas to try to address that. That was like 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like we have to do something more outside of what LPS can do. LPS needs more support. So I think, we got to go to our other officials and try to see if they can help us work this and see if we can get this to be their cause. I think the idea that there's, you said 25,000 nationally.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that might be, in the state, it looks like it's a good profession. And we should try to create some space for some of the people in the area to attend. So if there's interest within LPS, please let me know. I'd love to try to get that together.
We're interested in any way that we can get the services that we need.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions?
Yes.
Mr. Polino.
Ms. Bergeron, I've visited many schools in Lawrence, and I speak to other school administrators around the state, and they have the same problem we have. We couldn't find a speech therapist. But something that I haven't speak to nobody to come to this conclusion is, just by experience, is when a plan to reach a goal doesn't work, we don't change. We should change the plan to reach that goal. Basically, what you have been doing in many other districts hasn't worked, and I don't think it will work 3, 4, 5, or 10 years. Because, as you say, we're competing with hospitals. Why would I go to work in Lawrence, a city that has so many murders and all the crime that we have, to get paid less money than the money they can get paid in a hospital in Boston? So I don't think the approach we're taking will solve the problem that we have. And they get more pay in a hospital. What about we prioritize this? These kids need the help. If we have to pay more than anybody else, I think that's something that we have to consider and do.
And I think that's something that's in the union negotiation
But
round
I
at
don't
this
think,
point.
But I don't think we have done it good enough to attract. We have been talking for many years, and nothing has happened. Right now, Lawrence is no more attractive than any hospital in Boston, than any other school district around our city. So I believe what Piano is saying, like, we need to do something more creative. We need to meet. When you say that all the school districts meet and do something different to solve the issue, they're doing something different to solve the issue they have, not to bring speech therapists to us. So we have to be creative. We have to reinvent the wheel in this time and find something creative, meet up, go talk to the Department of Higher Education, speak to the administrator of UMass Lowell. We need to be ahead of any other district because we are in disadvantage. We are not as attractive as they are. We have problems. And this is a huge problem that we have as a district. And I think we should take a different approach, a more aggressive approach to fix this issue. Otherwise, we're going to be here in 2 more years with the same result.
Anyone else? All right, Dr. Bergeron, can we go on to the next slide?
Okay, the next one was our professional learning.
Any questions on this slide?
I do, but I'd let someone else go first. Okay.
No, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. sometimes one of the hard things about sort of going back to things that were being discussed is figuring out what your notes were. At one point, so we say baseline of current school-based and district-wide professional learning opportunities. My question was, can you list some of those learning opportunities? Or is it essentially like the differentiated instruction?
There have been many different learning opportunities depending on the school because we have autonomy. Every school chooses their different professional learning. So as we went across and collected what people have done, some schools have done differentiation and differentiating instruction. Some have done universal design for learning, which is how you plan to address the needs of all students in the classroom. So in looking across what everybody's been offering and trying to consolidate it down to what are the key areas that we need to move inclusion forward, these were the big ones that popped out as ongoing needs going forward.
Can we, so in the second line, we're talking about a survey that was administered to, I'm sorry. So as far as these learning opportunities and what each of these individual schools are doing, does the district then analyze what, sort of like what went well, and tries to get some of the other schools to copy that or do something similar to that?
We share, every school shares what they've been doing and invite people to come in some of their professional learning. So if I'm working with a school on one thing, we invite another school that might be working towards that to send a couple of people to see what it's about, so that they might bring it to their school. So there's a lot of sharing among the schools of the practices they're utilizing. And some of it has to do with what money they've set aside for their professional development and what they need to focus on for their school. Whereas at the district level, I'm trying to focus on, I want to push the whole district while allowing for their autonomy to join in when they're ready to join in.
Okay.
So I'm offering these broad-based trainings that are addressing these big needs that were identified.
Mm-hmm.
Some schools have had some of that, so they're now in a refinement piece and they're doing some coaching around that rather than taking the basics. But we're putting out the basics to everybody have the same opportunity to have the foundational skills, and the schools are then building upon those to advance the skills for their staff.
Okay. In the second line, it's mentioned a survey that was administered to all instructional staff. Is that staff within those 10 schools or all of LPS?
That was the one where we said they opted not to do the survey. So in my last bullet, in talking, because they were doing as part of their school reviews,
Okay.
they were actually doing focus groups with staff to get those needs identified. So all the schools that have done the school reviews this year, about 10 of them, have done that piece of it, and those are the things that popped out. The others, when they go through the school review in the upcoming year, will follow that same path.
Okay. I'd love that information. Like once we have it accumulated, that's shared with the group. Thank you.
Dr. Rivera?
Dr. Bergeron, you mentioned that there were training in regards to working with children with autism spectrum disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Children with autism spectrum disorder often display maladaptive behaviors, real challenging, aggressive behaviors. I've been receiving complaints that parents have been called to dismiss their child when they're demonstrating maladaptive behaviors. Shouldn't the students have a behavior support plan in order to access their education? Why are they being forced to be dismissed instead of being provided with the appropriate behavioral interventions?
They should have a behavior support plan in place. They should have done a functional behavioral assessment and put a behavioral plan in place for that particular child and how they were going to address those needs.
But they're being dismissed. They're being called to be dismissed.
If parents don't call me and notify me of those concerns, I can't address them. The ones that have called, we've had team meetings, we've made sure those things were in place, and we've talked to the administration about what the protocol and practice is.
During the IEP meetings, are there, scheduled training so that parents can be on board with the behavior support plan so that they can be consistent at home with them?
Depending on what type of plan you're putting in place. So we do have a lot of the students on the spectrum. They're also getting home-based supports, so that we're trying to mirror what we're doing in school with what they're doing at home, or vice versa. If they already have something at home, we try to mirror it in our plan in school. So there is a consistency, because that's one of the issues for students on the spectrum. They don't do change well in general. So yes, we do both services in both places. And if there's a need to do a behavioral assessment in both places, we do that. But individual cases like the ones who call you, if I don't know those, to intervene and make sure that we're putting the things in place, it's hard for me to talk about those.
No,
without
I
knowing.
understand, and I'll direct them your way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to spin off of that question, during a team meeting, if a child is expressing a behavioral issue, shouldn't that be addressed at that time, and shouldn't the plan be created as well as the IEP?
It should be part of the creation, should be a team effort in creating the plan.
Rather than waiting until the child exhibits a certain behavior and then reconvening the team again and having people come back and then, recreating a plan.
Sometimes the difference is you create a plan, a basic plan maybe. You may need a functional behavioral assessment to have somebody identify what is the root of the behavior so that you know how to intervene better. But you may put something in place to at least get started to track some data that will help inform the functional behavioral assessment as to when you're seeing it, how it's happening, what's happening first that's triggering that behavior, in order to put a better plan in place to ensure that you're addressing that before it becomes a behavior that you don't want to see.
All right, thank you.
Madam
Any
Chair?
further questions? Mr. Payano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say Dr. Rivera brought up some great points, and I would say to all the school committee members that I think one of our roles is just that, to be advocates. I think most people, when they go through the system, they usually get that support, but there are times where there are hiccups. There are times where miscommunication can happen. For example, I was dealing with a parent that wasn't trusting of the school, and when we showed up at 1 o'clock, and we called the one of the sort of like liaisons. The meeting was actually at 1:30, but the parent thought it was at 1. So there was like this sort of that just added on, and I think by having me there, I was able to sort of bridge both the parent's concern and what was going on, and the parent at the end came out happy with the compromise that was reached. But I think things would have been different if there wasn't someone there that they felt like they could trust and was advocating for them. So I think with this in particular issue, it counts, and I think there's other different issues as well. So one of the things that I think, especially, I'm glad that it's coming out now that school is ending, because that gives us an opportunity to sort of address this when school begins next year. We have to do a better job at the school has to do a better job at letting parents know who their representatives are. So perhaps as one of the documents that is sent to the parents, will be, these are your school committee members, and these are some reasons why, you would contact them or something like that. And I think as school committee members, we have to understand that, we play both roles as representative of the public school system and also as advocate for the community. We have to figure out a way that we can connect both individuals to work and not try to sort of, for example, that meeting, I didn't subject myself to, the different advice or things that were going on. I was just more kind of like in the room. So it's definitely, I think, something that could happen that I think might solve some of the issues that people have, especially when it comes to trust and communication errors.
And we would ask too, similar to what I do, because I talk to thousands of parents probably over the course of a year, that we try and empower the parent to follow the chain. So instead of just jumping to school committee or to the mayor's office, did you talk to your principal? And they'll say, well, no, I talked to so-and-so. No, I said, did you talk to your principal? Because they're the one that can address it at your school. If you talk to your principal, then it's okay. I'll have a conversation too. But we try and empower them to take their actions too.
Follow up, and I think, and I would agree with that. And I think, it's definitely a discussion that could also be had with school committee members. Because I think anytime that I get a call, I kind of, I listen to the concern and I see like how big of an issue is this? Have they talked to the principal? Have they talked to a teacher? Okay, here's your first step.
Right.
This doesn't work, or you did talk to them and you got a bad result. I'm stepping in. But that's definitely, I think that's something that we can easily do. At the end of the day, you also, everybody here is volunteer, non-paid. So it's not like you can take 1,000 calls, right? You can't be there from Monday to Friday. But there's definitely issues that happen that sometimes are missed, and sometimes it has to do with parents not feeling like not having the confidence to go and speak a second language, even if there's going to be a translator there. And they need someone that they feel like is going to advocate for them.
And
so
I think,
I don't know. Do you think that's something we can work on for
absolutely.
September?
I think it's something we're constantly working on. I also think that we encourage parents to bring someone with them, whether it's another family member, a friend, or somebody, because it's intimidating. It's intimidating to be a parent alone walking into a team meeting where there are maybe 7 professionals sitting there and giving you information about your child, and you're trying to take it all in and figure out what does it all mean, and maybe not feeling like all of your information about your child is also being considered equally with all that professional information.
Right.
So we try to be, say, do you need another meeting? Do we need to go back through this? But I'm not going to say it happens 100% of the time. That wouldn't be true.
And follow up to that, I think I would agree with that. I've seen it happen, but I think there's a difference between someone bringing their brother, their neighbor, than them bringing someone on this table, right? Because you have a better sometimes you have a better understanding of the system, and you could. So immediately when that was happening, I was able to talk to the principal, and the principal was able to resolve the problem right away. That woman, if I wasn't there and it was a family member, they might have been like, oh, this person is trying to push us off, let's leave. Because that's what the parent wanted to do. The parent wanted to leave. So it's just a thought, and I think there's room to sort of help improve that, especially when we're talking about how we could empower the school committee and how we can strengthen it. I think that's a good way to put people to work.
Is that Ms. Payano?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, Dr. Bergeron, do you
Go
move
for my
forward?
next couple of slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So our next slide was just to give you some other updates that weren't on the action plan, but kind of link to the action plan. Some of them I've actually mentioned as we've been talking. So staffing has been a little more consistent this year, aside from the couple of retirements that we've had, and we're moving towards filling those positions. Like the PT that resigned in January, we haven't been successful in filling. And we did contract the one PT that we had that took us a long time to fill once that person didn't return from maternity leave. We've been able to expand our bilingual supports in speech and school psychology. We've got a great pipeline with Tufts right now for school psychologists. We actually have 5 student interns that come out of Tufts University that are doing their 2nd or 3rd year work as interns with us and are able to do some of the testing under the supervision of the school psychologist. So that's a positive. We wish that's where we need to focus more on the PT and SL speech language in order to get that same type of pipeline going. Infrastructure in terms of access to data for decision making has greatly improved. We can run reports on almost any indicator that we need in terms of being able to fulfill requests or make decisions on where our resources need to be realigned based on what's happening in the department at any given time of the year. And to identify trends in placement and needs for what's going to be coming up as we look at placements for the upcoming school year. Overall translation and interpretation services have been bolstered, and for timelines, our documents are being translated much more rapidly. We're in compliance with timelines. We cleared our mid-cycle, all of our mid-cycle issues. There were 9 indicators that needed some further work. Those have all been cleared at this time within the 9-month range rather than a full year, so we're happy to say that's done. We've contracted, like we said, with the ASD or inclusion specialist this year, so those are the ones that we've been working with, and we'll be bringing back Pamela Ely from the Ely Center to do more work on social pragmatics, because that was a very well-received training by the speech and language therapist and the early childhood staff who do a lot of work around social language and communication. We're working, like I said, with Dr. O'Loughlin around our plain language glossary, and we have been planning all this year for an inclusion pilot that is going to move a couple of the classes out of the SES Annex into the Gilmet Complex next year to start that transitioning to a more inclusive environment for students who are actually ready. So we've been working with parents, we've been working with the consultants and leaders at both schools, and they are ready to take on a classroom at the elementary level and a classroom at the middle school level in order to start their transition for some of the students who had been in that more isolated environment at the annex, who are now ready to start moving back into a schoolhouse. So that's our first pilot, and if it goes well, the goal is to start looking at a pilot in all of the large schools so that we have more opportunity for those students to be involved. So that's underway at this point.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Payano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there an opportunity for us to engage in any way? Just because that's having seen the annex when it was bare and it looked like a jail, and then the transformation a year later, and now we're moving on to something different where they're going back into the school. I'd love to see that, because I think that's like a really big improvement. And I know that we first spoke, that I think it was like that first day. Like a lot of parents were upset, and you were sort of saying that something like this would happen. I didn't really think, I couldn't see how it could be done. So I'd love to. It's
been an interesting year in making it happen. We're not going to say that the annex necessarily is going away, because there may always be a cohort of students that is the best place or the place that's the least restrictive for them, and they may start there and then be ready to transition. So that opportunity needs to remain in play as that continuum we talked about. But as students are ready, we're looking to make sure we have places for them to step to that are already trained and have the skills and are able to address those needs as they come to the schoolhouse, and then slowly transition maybe out of a smaller class into the general education for parts of their day. So once they're up and running, I'm sure they'll be thrilled to have you go and visit. I would say probably give them 3 or 4 weeks, because change with the population is difficult. So getting into a new school routine, a new schedule, new environs might take them a little while to get into the groove to have visitors coming in to see them. Okay. Then we have our last slide, which is our continued areas where we know we're continuing to focus on, because we know not all is wonderful in the world of special education. There's always room for improvement. So we are looking at expanding options to create a larger interpreter pool. We have been talking about looking at hiring interpreter-specific jobs, so that we're not asking current staff to take that on in addition, but actually hiring credentialed interpreters and having a cohort of maybe 4 or 5 that are readily available at all times, because that's going to be their job. So we're looking at the resourcing of that and how we can make that happen. One of our staff that we did hire in special education this year in our clerk role is a credentialed interpreter and translator. So she's been helping along with our 18 that we had trained. But I think it would be valuable to have 4 or 5 of those individuals that would be readily available for any meetings at any time, because the number is high and we need to make that happen. So it's something we're exploring at this point to see how we can financially make that work. So implementing our inclusion best practices is not good enough that we just create the guide. We want to see it being implemented and utilized. So it's something we're going to be watching closely and making sure that they're using the data and their observations and the assessments to inform their decision-making for any changes they need to make and how they've implemented their action plan this year for the following year. Moving forward with the next round of school reviews to make sure that they're getting ready for planning for 18-19. I do believe we're talking that already, but that they'll be ready for their implementation when it comes. Hiring of our ancillary support staff at this point, we're interviewing like crazy. We did get a good number of applicants for our speech vacancies, so we had about 20 applicants. So we're hopeful that we will find the 3 we're looking for. We have not had a single PT applicant for the position that we have posted. So we've been talking to contractors, and they're seeing who they can locate if we have to contract those services. We'll be supporting the new Director of Pupil Personnel, Special Education. We had 21 applicants for that position. So we're waiting to finalize and see who that person's going to be. We are in the final stages of deciding that individual. I will tell you I'm very excited that that person's coming aboard, and I will be helping to support her or him as they take on that role moving into the next school year. Providing ongoing professional learning opportunities around staffing for students and around inclusion of students for all of our staff. And we're looking at not inclusion just in music and art, but looking at how are they included across the school community, whether it's after-school activities, athletics, enrichment, academics. We want to look at all of those as options for inclusion. And then our last one is really working with the new CPAC board to expand their membership and create greater opportunities for parental voice. So where we talked earlier about how do they link with other agencies or other boards in the community so that they are getting their voices heard about what do we need to do better to support the students with disabilities in our community.
Dr. Bergeron, I have one question. We talked a lot about the speech and language therapists. Based on the current enrollment, how many speech and language therapists do we need for a reasonable, to meet the needs of the kids and have a reasonable caseload for the speech and language therapists? What is that number? Could you?
Off the top of my head, I could probably shoot a number, but I'd rather look at the actual data. I know that we are budgeted for nine therapists and 7 assistants. So that would make a cohort of 16, which is 2 more than we've had this year. But if we wanted to keep caseloads low,
I know you don't know what the enrollment's going to be from the preschools coming in.
that's where the big numbers are.
That's where the issue is. But I don't think we know as a committee what that actual number is that would, that would make the caseloads manageable for the speech and language.
I would tell you the speech and language therapist would probably tell you double the number we have now.
Okay.
So that's why we're trying to work on some of the other, stopping all the referrals that are taking up so much of their time for testing.
Okay.
So that will help assist them in being able to manage more the work that workflow they're doing.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Payano?
who does how many agencies or what are the agencies that do these referrals?
Oh, they come from all over. They come from physician's office, they come from Head Start, they come from all the early intervention programs, they come from all the daycares in the community. We have 500 home daycares in the community.
Follow up. So what type of how are you educating these folks that are referring?
We have met with them on a regular basis this year through the Inclusive Early Childhood forums that we've had with the providers, predominantly with most of the big providers because you can't get all the family daycare providers in. And we've met with them. We've come up with a protocol that they're following for looking at referrals. We are actually going out and doing some training with them in the fall, and we're putting together a team of ancillary providers who are going to go out and do screenings in the larger settings to look at kids who they think may have a concern, rather than just doing a quick referral, letting them go in and observe them and do a quick screen to give them ideas of how they could address the needs there, rather than making a referral if it's not needed. So we're trying to try that in terms of helping to reduce the flow while we educate the early intervention providers or the daycare providers.
So just one more follow-up. The individuals that you're currently communicating, would you say they're 25% of the whole, 50% of the whole?
The individuals we're communicating with probably represent about 70% of all of the daycares in the district. So we're talking with like the community group that probably has some of the largest daycares, or the Head Start group that has a whole other group. South Bay and early intervention, EI, we're looking at those as some of the biggest providers and referring sources. The next goal is to look at the physicians, but they're a little harder to get into a room with.
Thank you. Any further questions of the committee on this SPED update?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Dr. Rivera?
Just a suggestion in terms of the continued areas of focus. You mentioned obviously hiring ancillary staff is a big focus, but I think the focus should also be on the retention of staff, because you have had these positions filled in the past, and you mentioned the caseload size. I mean, if I was a speech therapist and my caseload was starting off in September, 30 kids, but then by mid-school year, my caseload's 60 kids, double the caseload, but not double the salary. I mean, that's an issue. You know what I mean? There needs to be some incentives for therapists to want to stay when they get burned out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Dr. Bergeron. last year when the task force met, I thought a lot of the benchmarks were a little bit aggressive as far as if you were going to meet them for the first year. And I want to thank you for the report and the progress that you've made thus far with the team.
It's been a busy year, but a lot of good things have happened.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of our.
Madam
Oh,
Chair.
we got other information
Mr.
that you were
Payano?
handed, right?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to, I think the City Council just passed their, the budget for the city, and there was a huge increase with LPS. I'd like to add, the budget to the agenda, Madam Chair, to allow Dr. Bergeron or whoever to sort of talk about sort of that process and what they think. I think it would require a second, so I'd like to add.
Is that in form of a motion?
Yeah, so I'd like to add the budget to the agenda.
Is there a second? Second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay, Dr. Bergeron, could you address the budget, please?
We've spent the last 4 weeks at City Council for different parts of our budget. So Vivian and I, if you want to join, come to the mic just in case there's things you want to add, have gone before City Council on the $2.5 million, which was the 1.5% additional that we had requested to help offset some of the deficit that we had this year, given that we had taken a $5 million reduction last year, and we were looking at a $4.4 million this year to make us whole. So we went back to the mayor. He did put together a plan to use one-time money to offset that $2.5 million. $1.5 million of that came from the settlement on the high school, and another $1 million came out of free cash as one-time money that we could use to support some of our infrastructural things that would be one-time cost, knowing going forward that this is not going to be an annual thing, and we have to look closely at how we're going to address that in the upcoming year. So we spent time explaining all of that to City Council, meeting with them, answering their questions, and they did pass that last week. So they unanimously approved the $2.5 million with the condition that they know that this is one-time money. So we know that we have work cut out to make sure that it's a one-time money. It's going to help some of the structural changes at the high school, some of our computer activities that we need to build our computer base because of going online testing, things like that are one-time cost, or final agreements and contracts that are ending or will be ending coming up shortly. So we're using that money to do those types of things and not people. Then we went to City Council for our regular budget, our net school spending budget. It did have some increases around transportation, which were some of the questions about how come transportation's increasing. We did talk to them about the changes around, we just have a new contract going to place for special education transportation. We've entered into a 5-year contract at a 2.5, 300 over 5 years. So that really for us is value, because we looked at the surrounding communities and the local urbans. I think it was 7% was the average rate that they were increasing each year. So we look like we've got about 8% over 5 years rather than 7% in the upcoming year. So that was a few $100,000. And the other was because of the new foster care provision around transportation for children in foster care, should they be placed outside of your community and in a different foster home or group home or residential placement, and I think it is in the best interest to keep the child where they are for educational stabilization, we are now required to transport them back if we become the school of choice for that child. And that covers them the entire time they're in the foster care system. So we could have a child going to foster care in first grade and not actually be living in Lawrence, but when they went in, they were, and they feel Lawrence is the best place for them, and we will be transporting them until there's a decision made that we may not be the best place for them. Of course, that came with no money. So we have to look at how do we estimate what those costs will be, and we did it based on the 6 months this year where that new law came into being in December, though they haven't fleshed out all the requirements from the state level between DCF and DESE. So we've estimated that's gonna cost us around $325,000 a year in addition. So those costs got added into the budget, so they saw about a $690,000 increase in transportation? 609, okay. That was the big questions were really around that, because I think city council understands there's not much they can do in terms of the basic net school spending. You know, they did ask us about what changes we would make, because we did say, in addition to the 2.5 that you're giving us, we're making $1.7 million worth of cuts in-house to bring us to where we need to be.
And I just want to add, the last time we were here, we talked about the leases, and the city is also picking up the leases that we had talked about in the budget presentation.
So now that budget did pass last night about 11:15. So we're good to go with that, and we have already talked to all the schools about taking a 1% reduction across the board to make our 1.7. Every department and every school has to take a 1% reduction in their budget, and they get to choose where they are making those cuts, because that's part of their autonomy, and being able to make decisions about where they can make a cut that is not going to impact service delivery in the classroom. So they have actually given Vivian all of their list of their cuts so that we can make those reductions to put us in where we need to be to start the fiscal year.
Thank you. Questions?
You can go first.
Dr. Rivera?
What kind of cuts were made by the schools, and were there any positions cut from any of the schools?
So we're in the process of reviewing all the cuts at this point. So we have up until June 30th to get the budget ready to upload into our accounting system. So we've just had the schools kind of submit all that over the past couple of weeks, and meanwhile we were working on getting our budget passed. So I can definitely get that to you once we finalize all that data.
Thank you.
Mr. Payano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just want to thank the members of the committee and obviously LPS and the community members that were involved in sort of advocating for supporting, the idea that the city should be paying more than the minimum, or at least reach the minimum. I think we saw within a period of month and a half, we saw a big change where the mayor was kind of saying he's supportive, but he was going to present two proposals, and he was worried that the city council might not be supportive, and he ended up finding a very supportive city council. But I think it was because of the advocacy the community was doing on that, and the fact that we got the leases also paid for. I think that's great. So while I am very happy that we got this support for this year, I'm just, because it's one time, right? So there's this hesitation within the city council where they don't quite understand exactly sort of the responsibilities, and they don't understand what the net school spending, the requirement is just to give an adequate
That's
education. Right. And I think, now we have, 10 months or before the budget process starts again. And we really sort of have to start strategizing how we're going to connect with the city council members, the current or future ones, to ensure that next March there isn't necessarily this issue where we're worried about either going to meet their requirement. And this idea, well, I think it's great, but the idea that I feel like every year we're asking our schools to make cuts. And at some point, we have to, as a community, we have to really make these tough decisions about what are we going to invest on. And I think the best thing to invest on is our youth. But I think us as education leaders and education advocates, we have to start sort of moving along in that direction. And we look onto folks at LPS to sort of guide us on what the best path to take when it comes to that. I think, I know a few of us did some type of advocacy work, but it was also kind of late in the game, and there was money, extra money to give. Yeah, next year, it's not going to be there. So this idea, I know that in one of these city council meetings, one of the city councils was saying that we do more, that they did more than net school spending because they took out loans for us. So there's sort of this education piece that needs to be had, and we need to engage them with what goes on with the school That way they don't feel like they're separate from LPS.
And I think the city council this year did ask a lot of very good questions. We were thrilled that it was a unanimous vote on both budgets, which it says they are a more cohesive group around making those decisions.
Dr. Burns, follow up. I think that was because there was there was money there.
That's true.
If there wasn't that money there,
That's right.
and we were battling whether what goes first, it might have been a completely different discussion.
Oh, I agree. We've
I
been
think
there before.
We're lucky that we have a couple of former school committee members there that understand sort of the importance of that. And I think they're probably very good advocates. But I think next year is going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather get started now than in March.
Just a thought, Dr. Bergeron. You know how we participated in school committee training. How would it be if we schedule some kind of a joint training between the city council and the school committee, and talk about finances and the net school spending and the different nuances of the school department and what the city is responsible for? I know they have an understanding, but it might help bridge that gap when it comes to deciding, are we going to support the school system above and beyond the required amount?
I think that's a great idea. Yesterday one of the counselors had mentioned that most of the city's budget goes to the school department, yet most of the school's budget is coming from the state. So I love the idea of collaborating before with city council, having a joint meeting, and we're happy to come up with a presentation that will kind of outline it for them, similar to what we did for you, which we kind of did give them, but it's always good to do a refresher. And we actually start the budget process, believe it or not, come November, because it's such a big budget. We start early on in the game, so we could definitely do it earlier than March. Absolutely.
That would be great. Any further questions?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Payano?
I would say I think that's an amazing idea. And to follow up to that, one of the things the city councilors were saying is that they would love more conversations. I don't know exactly how these conversations could look like, but I think they're thinking about not just conversations around budget, but just overall, where is the school going? So I think that there's an opportunity there, especially as we talk about receiver, one day coming out of receivership, and what does that look like? And, is there going to be a change in sort of the governance of the school committee? I think those discussions, really have to start at some point. And perhaps, maybe sometime in the fall, we can have some type of conversation between all of us. But definitely we can start with a training.
And I will raise that to the receiver, because we know that ultimately that will be his determination.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions of the committee?
Madam Chair,
go ahead.
I just have a question to ask, if it could be put to the receiver. I think it'd be great if we, as we start the new year in September, if we had a conversation or a report on how the receivership is going and plans on transition. It would be great if we could invite the commissioner to be there, so he can let us know what his thoughts are, and I'm hoping that by saying it now, it would give plenty of time to sort of make it happen. But I definitely want to and part of it, it's also a little bit selfish in a way, because I started my second year with receivership. At the end of this year, I won't be on the school committee anymore, and I would love to leave with the idea that some work is being done around finally transitioning. Whether that transitioning is 3 years or 5 years, I feel like I would leave in December with more hope if that conversation was had.
We will put that forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
You did receive some documents that you had asked for at the last school committee meeting. Okay, so I don't know if there are any things on there that you need clarified. So you'd asked for the exempt employee list, kind of how we come to the needs for facilities and the increase in the monies there, and for the number of instructional versus non-instructional staff. So Vivian had prepared those for you. I don't know if you have specific questions.
Dr. Bergeron, are the exempt employees included in the number of non-instructional? Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions with these documents?
All right,
That-
then we'll
thank you.
move on.
Move on.
Okay, so we're up to public participation. So tonight we have Mr. Malley. Okay, and reminder, we have a 2-minute limit on public participation. Joni, we'll keep time.
Good evening, honorable members. We are grateful to end such an awesome academic year. March forward with the excellent record of the academic year, the year with great academic progress, a year with many academic accomplishments. Million thanks to the Superintendent Raleigh leadership of Honorable Superintendent Raleigh made Lawrence Public School the best example of the success in the past academic year. The Lawrence Public School, with success of the turnaround plan, now has more high school graduate, more MCAS improvement, more level 1 school. Our public school transformed to be the best public school in the nation. At the end of this excellent academic year, we offer the best thanks to our wonderful teachers and their union. Thank you for your hard work and for your dedication and sacrifices. Without you and your wonderful union and the dedication, we never reach to the highest accomplishment of the year. While all the news about our city has been bad news, but the news of our Lawrence Public School is only positive. Indeed, our city of immigrants with the best education has risen up again. The new generation are proud for the best challenges of the 21st century. We need to remember in this important election year, we the 83,000 citizens are united to demand of our public and elected officials continuously support our teachers and the great union. We are where we are because of the excellent teachers that we have. While with the best end of the year wishes, remember, continue to strive for excellence. Let's move forward for having the best public school in our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malley. Dr. Rivera?
During our last committee meeting, there were various defamatory comments that were made about a school committee person which were associated with me in the local paper. There were lies fabricated to discredit me and the work I've done to support our students. Rather than address the issue of the high school library, the route of character assassination was chosen. Frankly, that is the epitome of petty politics, and it was extremely disrespectful towards the students who have been trying to advocate for themselves and the resources that they need to be successful at the high school. The original story in the paper about the high school library failed to mention that the entire committee received an anonymous letter in January notifying us of a, quote, situation created by the superintendent during the last 2 years, and that is the limited access, space, and resources of the Lawrence High School Library. I was not creating a narrative of divisiveness. I was literally reading what was put forth in front of me. The letter asked, why are 3,000 seniors, juniors, sophomores, or other students left with such a limited library so that 200 students in the academy can have a prep-like experience? They went on to say that this does not feel fair or equitable. It sounds to me like the divisiveness was created when you depleted the majority of the student body with the resources they need to be academically successful. Families from the Abbott Academy were invited to the last meeting, but not the families of the majority of the student body who were impacted by the decision to house the school in the library. Their concerns were ignored. I don't have an issue with the Abbott Academy other than it needs to be housed elsewhere so it does not interfere with the resources the majority of the student body needs to succeed. This item should have been added to the agenda months ago, and we should have had the discussion as a community about these changes, but that only highlights the political oppression we're facing within our school district today. Under this receivership, taxpayers and elected officials do not have any say with what happens with our children in school or at these meetings. It's not a democracy, it's a dictatorship.
Okay, our next participant is Amy Doobie.
The phrase "not the right fit" was brought up at the last school committee meeting. This is a label LPS sticks on anyone who speaks up against unethical and illegal practices within the district whose hallmarks are incompetence and inexperience. Not the right fit is a label the receivership uses when they actually can't find any legitimate reason not to renew a contract. I think 99.99% of Lawrence residents would agree that a bilingual Latina mother with a clinical doctorate from Northeastern University is quite the right fit for Lawrence. I sat across from her at a number of IEP meetings and found her to be a consistently fierce advocate for children's rights. It was mentioned that her concern for student rights was politically motivated. That's strange, because she never once pulled campaign papers to run, nor does she have a campaign finance account. In fact, she has never had a single political event fundraiser. It was inferred that because she chooses not to send her child to LPS, that her input is not valuable nor wanted. It's strange that it was not mentioned that counselors Abdu, LaPlante, and Chief of Staff Burnell also choose not to send their children to LPS. This sends a strong message to the community when Lawrence's own elected officials opt their children out of LPS. When will this receivership address the many issues of incompetency that prompt able residents to opt out their children from LPS?
Joshua Alba.
Hello, and thank you, elected officials, for your work and dedication to our public schools. Citizens of Lawrence, we have a serious problem within our school system. We have a majority of the teaching and administrative staff that do not represent the majority of our student body, nor do they generally have the cultural competency to bridge the gap. On top of that, we have a very high turnover rate among them, leaving our students with broken relationships and broken learning, all of which could be addressed fairly easily in order to improve the learning process and outcomes. Generally, students and teachers are forced to work under a pedagogy whose models disregard student experiences and usurps classroom control over to non-educators. It erodes imagination and innovative potential through obsessive focus on high-stakes testing and mechanical thinking, as seen in such programs as STEM, and also in the increasing number of handheld devices being used to undermine teachers further. The extended school day and year further whips students to behave through police presence, uniforms, zero tolerance, and no-nonsense policies that manufacture students as products to be obedient and obsequious before authorities. This criminalization of young lives is today exacerbated by the lack of local control under colonial occupation, like in Puerto Rico, in the form of receivership that is all but deaf to the needs and integrities of our classroom educators and our community. The issue about the Lawrence High Library that was recently covered, thankfully, by the Eagle Tribune, the potential loss of accreditation, the great lack of transparency that disenfranchises Lawrence voters, and the disrespect shown to our elected officials by the state-appointed receiver must be rectified. This is our city, our school, our children, and it will be defended against interlopers. Thank you.
Sebastian Brown.
How's it going? So I want to talk about autonomy. And even before I do that, I just want to say it's ridiculous. We've been sitting here for 2 hours, the 10 of us that decided to come tonight. No wonder that there's not more public participation, because it's ridiculous. That's not what happens with city council. It's not normal to have the public comment be at the end of the session. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have that at the beginning. But autonomy is something that's been talked about as a kind of main model of the receivership since the beginning. Autonomy around schools have autonomy to be able to experiment. But I think we have to start, and I love that it's been talked about tonight already, but we have to start talking about autonomy for the school committee. Because if we're serious about having a transition where you go back to local community control, you can't have community autonomy. You can't have an empowered community without an empowered autonomous school committee. It's ridiculous to think that if we are actually serious about enacting a transition where you have, like you say, you want parents to be empowered, then how can you not have the representatives be empowered? That doesn't make any sense. And so, to be honest, this feels like futile even doing this, because I know y'all are writing notes, but I don't think there's any accountability built into this process to actually make sure that anything happens from that. So hopefully that we can, and I know we're not asking for permission. At some point, the community is ready to be mobilized to not ask for, but demand autonomy, because I fear we're missing the lesson. We're missing what the main problem was. What got us in receivership in the first place was not bad parents, or it was not parents not caring. It was a disempowered, disenfranchised community, and I fear we're going to leave receivership with the exact same thing. We're leading to the exact same thing in disempowered communities. So you can't have an empowered community without an empowered school committee. So I love, Pavel, your suggestion, Marinella, about how can we really create a transition plan, have an empowered school committee to really represent the community. Thank you.
Danielle, I don't have your last name printed and I can't make it out, so. Cameron, okay. Cameron?
Okay, so I've never really been to a school committee meeting, so I'm not that formally prepared. But I just like to address some of the issues that I as a student have understood that have been brought up. And first off, I'd like to say that I am on the Lawrence Youth Council and I do attend Abbott Lawrence Academy, but what I want to talk about is more on the behalf of other students, because I as Abbott, I'm always in the library, so I have the right to that, I guess, but the other students in LHS don't really get that, especially after school. We have a certain time that we can be there. It's from after school until 5, and that's the only time when some students can get access to the computers and some of the books that they need for school. And then after that time, there's almost no way that we can stay there. After 5, we have to leave the library, and sometimes it's even earlier that we get kicked out of it. And a lot of students have been complaining and saying that they feel as if this whole divide between Abbott and the rest of the school is, it's creating an environment that's not very successful both for each parties for learning, and then it creates a really big gap in it. But the big problem is about getting the resources after school, because a lot of these kids that go after school, they need the computers, but if they don't get access to it, then there's not much else that it can go or feel safe to go after school, especially if the buses only come at 6:30, and then if they have to walk home, then some students don't feel safe doing that. And then also, just as a student coming to this meeting, I would just like to say that I like to be able to know what's going on in my school district and everything that's happening on a higher level, but I would also like to be able to understand some more of what's going on, so using a little bit more kid-friendly words and explaining some more of the acronyms would kind of help out more. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, so at
Is
this
that
point,
it, Dr. Bergeron?
that's it. So
Public participation? Motion to adjourn. Could I have a second? All in favor?
thank you.
Adjourned. Thank you.